All right. Welcome everyone. This is another Truth Talks. I am your host and moderator, Ed Genesis. This is with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Kalamazoo that we were able to create a platform called Truth Talk where we speak directly to community about community-related issues. Today, a great one. We're talking about mental health, specifically in Black and Brown communities. And before I introduce our amazing panelists today, and we dive straight into it, I'm going to go through the touch tones because that's the way that we ground ourselves within TRHT. And again, shouts out to Emily Oliveras behind the scenes with the technical support. Shouts out to Shalana Lewis for supporting and advocating for such a panel, a platform that we can have real discussions, and we call it Truth Talks. And of course, shouts out to retired Captain Stacy Ledbetter for helping me co-create this platform. With no further ado, let's go straight into the touch tones, which is a way that we ground ourselves when we are having conversations in this type of space. And they are, just 1 minute. Sorry for the dead space. I'm bringing it right up. The touch tones are being 100% present, extending and presuming welcome. Speak your truth, always by invitation. So even though you all are the panelists, it's never forced to share. Listen deeply, maintain confidentiality. So even though this is a public forum, we still respect any stories that we share or people may comment. We don't take the stories into other spaces. No language of the soul is privilege over any other language of the soul. Value feeling as much as knowing. No fixing, no saving, no advising. Identify assumptions and suspend judgment. Respect and learn from silence. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. And trust the healing process, your own heart and the hearts of others. With that, I would like the amazing panelists, and I'm saying amazing because you all provide a service to not just to the community, but to the world. That's very appreciated. I, for one, appreciate it. With no further ado, if you can introduce yourselves, and after you're done, popcorn it over to the next person and we can dive straight into it. And we can start with Gabby De La Cruz, if you don't mind.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gabby De La Cruz. I'm the coordinator for the brand new Black and Brown Therapy Collective here in Kalamazoo under Rooted. And I'm also on the Civil Rights Board, which is also brand new here in the city of Kalamazoo. I'm pretty new to Kalamazoo, I would say. I moved here in 2016, so I feel like I'm still getting my bearings, I guess. Although every day I'm working hard to build community, and that's been hard with the pandemic, but I'm doing my best to participate as fully as possible. I am from California, and my parents are from Mexico, so that informs my perspective pretty thoroughly, I would say, just like growing up here and having that culture too. So that's me.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ferguson, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kenlana Ferguson. I am originally from Muskegon Heights. I've lived in Kalamazoo since I was 17 years old. I am a 3-time Bronco. I just can't seem to leave this place. So I do feel as if Kalamazoo is my second home. My partner is from Kalamazoo. So we've been here. I've been here most of my adult life. I'm a psychologist by training, and I'm currently the director of counseling at Kalamazoo College. I am also a part-time professor at Western, and I am a co-creator of the Black and Brown Therapy Collective with Kama Mitchell and Lana Lewis. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mr. Robert Washington, if you can introduce yourself, please. You're on mute, sir.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Washington, originally from Chicago, Illinois. Moved here when I was 15. Moved around, like Kimberly Ferguson said. I moved to Indianapolis, moved around and back in Kalamazoo. I got 20 years of experience in mental health. I'm currently working right now at a private practice at Choice for Changes as a therapist. My skill set is working with adolescent at-risk males, 7 to 17.
Thank you much. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for introducing yourselves, and let's get ready to dive straight into it. A question is not on the agenda. I tend to do that sometimes. So let's just have, let's be real. So a question is not on the agenda that I wanted to bring into the conversation is, why are we even having this discussion today? Why is it important that we're having this discussion today? More importantly, I should say. And Dr. Ferguson, why is this an important discussion?
So before we hopped on today, I shared backstage, I guess, that I have been involved in these conversations for so many years during my training as a psychologist. And I recognized many, many years ago that we're having these conversations in the halls of the academy. We're talking about the research, we're talking about the community, but we're not having these conversations in the community. Growing up in a Black community, in a Black neighborhood, I was a child who, what I now know, was experiencing anxiety. And I could not have that conversation. I had no reference for how to talk about my emotions. We call people crazy in our community all the time. And so if I'm sensing that these emotions and what's going on with my brain is something that's not okay, I didn't open up and talk about it because nobody talked about those things. And if it was talked about, it was called crazy. Nobody wants to be crazy. No child wants to be crazy. And I don't use that word now, but that's the word that was used in the community. And I think that word is still being used in community. And so we are here to start dismantling crazy and really attend to the stigmatization of mental health in Black and Brown communities. We have to start having these conversations. I have an 11-year-old son, and he tells me all the time when his brain is doing something or when he's having feelings. And it, for me, was to correct what didn't happen for me. So I know if we start to engage with our children, if we start to engage with our community, we can join in this conversation together. And we all have these lived experiences that we can share and really be in community with one another around something that is a part of our normal experience, which is our mental health. So that's why we are here.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. And you also brought it home to speaking about personal experiences. And that is one of the specific topics is the Black and Brown community, and having that, creating that normalization in the conversations of saying, have you talked to someone? Piggybacking off that same question, Mr. Robert Washington, why is this conversation important that we're having today? Why is this an important discussion?
This conversation is important for me because it brings awareness to the community that there's a lot of individuals out there who do struggle. But first, I want to kind of give an overview of what is a mental illness, because a lot of times we really think it's extreme. Like people can say, well, he's crazy, he's talking to himself. So with mental illness, it varies. So the definition of a mental illness is really, we call it a mental health disorder. You know, it refers to a wide range of mental health conditions, disorders that affects your mood, your thinking, and your behavior. And like, here's some examples like mental illness. It can be like depression, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders, addictive behaviors. A lot of the kids that I work with in the schools have some as simple as, you know, like anxiety disorders, where the schools sometimes misdiagnose a lot of our kids because they'll come to school and they'll say, well, this kid seems angry, where he can be having some symptoms of anxiety. So I think it's a awareness for the community, but also the schools, so that we don't overdiagnose our kids, for those who do seek out to get help, that they're not overdiagnosed, and also giving them to say, hey, it's okay to have anxiety. It's okay to deal with some mild depression. It's okay to feel sad, you know, helping kids kind of work through those skill sets and also develop, you know, some social and coping skills to just be able to maneuver and go through this difficult life that it may be. So I think, you know, for me, I'm glad to be here to just kind of, you know, give mental health a good shining bright light, because it's not a bad thing when someone says, hey, you know what, I'm dealing with some mental illness. But we always go with the extreme of thinking someone is crazy when someone might just be struggling in the moment, just trying to adapt through life.
Another wow. Okay. So we had underdiagnosis, which Dr. Ferguson lifted up, and people not even knowing how to reference the feelings that they're feeling. And then we have the overdiagnosis of people thinking that they know and put them on this medication, or wow. Okay. I can't wait to dive in. Lastly, but definitely not least, Gabby, if you could please weigh in on why this is an important discussion today.
I agree with Dr. Ferguson and Mr. Washington with all of the reasons that they gave. But on a personal note, as the coordinator of the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, I think it's important to have this conversation for the public, because I really want to highlight how straightforward and easy the process is through the Black and Brown Therapy Collective to sign up or receive therapy. Because one of the, like, I'll get contacted by people who want to go to therapy, and then oftentimes I sense a big hesitation because I won't hear back from them. And I think, you know, there's a lot in there, including like anxiety and like uncertainty and hesitation, and then also like worry about the actual process itself. And then oftentimes, you know, with enough like prodding from me, people will like jump in and then see that it's not that difficult to get therapy. And I think a lot of people who can't afford therapy, I'm speaking from experience, but like in this system that we live in, when like I grew up in poverty, when you need help, it's oftentimes the case that you have to jump through like a million hoops to get the help. And then oftentimes also talking to professionals, like to be given the thing that you really need, these essentials, it feels like you're being interrogated. And my goal is to make sure that like I never make anybody feel that way. So I think that's a really important reason to be here. And also I think it's really important to talk about mental health and mental struggles, mental illness diagnoses, you know, and these feelings whenever we can, as people of color and Black people, Indigenous people, because me growing up in a really traditional Mexican household, I was trained to be a certain way, you know, like I'm only allowed to have these feelings. And then it's really hard for me as an adult to label other more difficult feelings that I might be having. Everyone's just like, oh, you'll get through it. You have to be really strong. Like this is just who we are, you know? So hopefully like getting to talk about it as often as possible will help with that intergenerational, like, I don't know how to say it, like silencing that happens every time, like in a lot of our families. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of people. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I think it's true for a lot of people that like over generation after generation, you have all of these struggles that don't even always come from within. Like oftentimes it's the structure that you're raised in. And then there's like, you feel like there's no way out. So hopefully having this conversation will like get people to start thinking about like different avenues that they can take, and hopefully looking at the Black and Brown Therapy Collective as an option that is like a little bit more straightforward than other options that might be available.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I love the fact that you all, I didn't make it about Black and Brown on purpose, the first question, because I really just wanted to ask overview wise about the world. Like, why was this an important conversation? But I am extremely pleased with the fact that you all made it very personal. Like, this is needed here, but it's extra needed here, because it provides a segue of exactly what we're about to go into. So here we go. We have words like this, and this is just from my limited understanding of just, I love psychology. I am not a psychologist or don't have any credentials whatsoever. I just took a class and loved it, and took a bunch of more classes, and then had the opportunity of, through being on 3 years felony probation, on my third felony, I was told to talk to a therapist, anger management, psychiatrist, psychologist. And that was really my introduction in understanding a lot of things. One of the things that I left with overstanding a lot of the things is like the word lunatic, which once upon a time, it was said that people were affected by the moon, lunar. And people still say that it must be a full moon out. But once upon a time, you literally could be locked up if you acted out. And this is where a word like lunatic even came from. So starting with that, and then fast forward it, because when that word existed, racism was out of control. Segregation, just getting over, actually, I think slavery may have still been in existence when the word lunatic, I have to double check my dates, but I know that life for Black and Brown was way different. So when we fast forward and we think about in the 70s, and this is for the LGTB, I always mess it up. Every time I want to say it directly, I mess it up. So what I'm gonna say is, there's a book of mental disorders. In almost the 80s, late 70s, homosexuality was listed. And so we have this. And then we also have in America what they call mass incarceration, which mass incarceration is America makes up just 5% of the nation's population, but makes up an alarming almost 26% of incarcerated people. When we stir that pot and we look at what we're working with, then we know disproportionately Black and Brown people have been locked up. But also, if we look at that pot of incarcerated people, then we know people that have suffered from mental disorders have been incarcerated before being diagnosed. And so we go back into that underdiagnosis or that overdiagnosis. With that, I wanted to turn it over to you. All have already touched on it, but why is this so important in the Black and Brown communities that we discuss these type of things, especially with that type of platform, like preceding this conversation? Like, this is what we're dealing with in North America. So somebody like me, my first introduction to therapy was, I was already in trouble. This was my third felony, 3 years felony probation. In hindsight, I say somebody I should have had access to talking to somebody before landing into that. But that's just my personal opinion. I would like to turn it over to the experts, starting with Gabby, because you mentioned the Black and Brown initiative. What is that? Can we know more about that, and then how that can impact the community?
Sure. The Black and Brown Therapy Collective was started in the fall of 2020. And the purpose of it is to connect Black and Brown residents with Black and Brown therapists in the community. And the reason we want to do that is because, like from my perspective, I think it's to get anywhere with therapy, you need to feel safe and you need to be able to be vulnerable. And I think for a lot of people, if they have a shared experience with their therapist, it's going to be a lot easier to feel like they're in a safe space and to open up. And I mean, I have personal experience with that. I've had 2 white therapists before my current Latinx therapist who isn't white. And I feel like that warming up period was a lot shorter with her versus the ones that I had before her. And someone mentioned this earlier, but or I guess in the backstage conversation, but I think with the previous 2 therapists that I saw, well, first of all, I saw them because they were free, because they were through my university. And so I didn't have a lot of options. Everyone who was offered to me was just like a white man. So both of them were white men. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm stuck with this. Like, these are my options. I don't have money. And then also the relationship, I thought I was like locked into it. So I guess I'm kind of like going all over the place, but so the Black and Brown Therapy Collective is here to connect people with people who might understand them a little bit better than typical white therapists, and white therapists make up most of the therapists in the country. So I think we don't have enough representation in the therapy community currently, and we're so that's why we're like highlighting these people in the community so that they can help Black and Brown people in the community too. Like I said, I think there's like a more baseline kind of understanding, and so I think that's important. And I wanted to. You reminded me of my previous job. I was working in restorative justice in the middle and high school, and then sometimes elementary schools, and sometimes I'd come to Kalamazoo, and I saw this really across the board, but like in Kalamazoo schools and then also in Vicksburg schools. I observed very often that there would be like a young Black boy who like had gotten into some sort of trouble, and usually it was like some really simple conflict that every kid gets into. But I would observe that a lot of the administrators, a lot of teachers seem to take this behavior really personally and label these kids, you know, those words like angry and non-compliant and those kinds of things, instead of like when for example, I saw a kid who was like 13 and he was pretty tall for his age, and he looked really depressed to me. Other adults around me were labeling him as like aggressive and angry. And I was just like, okay, this is really broken. And so I think, you know, you mentioned, you know, all these different points where you could have gone into this therapy relationship before you went into the prison pipeline, not prison pipeline, but like, you know, the criminal justice, prison industrial complex pipeline. And I think I've observed that, you know, like the point before kids get there. And so I think, I know I'm kind of long-winded, but I think the help that this collective can, or the impact that this collective can have on the community is really to, like, overall just to lower desperation, a sense of desperation. And I think that is really going to decrease the amount of people going into that pipeline. Because like you say, we have disproportionate amounts of Black and brown people in the prison system. And I mean, I think that can directly be traced to slavery. That's like just a unique history of the United States. Something had to replace that labor. And so then there have to be drivers, and there have to be reasons to arrest people. And then you have, you know, defunding mental health services. And then where are those people going to go? They're going to go to prison. So anyway, I kind of went all over the place. So sorry about that.
No, you did not go all over the place. You answered. Thank you very much for explaining the need. Before going over to the co-creator, Dr. Ferguson, to go even deeper, I want to lift up, Gabby, you just described, so my 3 years felony probation, I was given a white psychiatrist who told me I needed Lamictal and Zoloft. like 15 minutes after talking to me. I was like, well, I've never needed medication, but okay. And I'm not the type of person that just takes something just because somebody says something, even if it can save my life. I have to ask a lot of questions. And me being raised by primarily Black women, they read the back of everything, but they'll take it out of my hand and read it growing up. So it's just instinctive that I call my mother and everybody else, excuse me, and ask, like, what do you think this is? And my pushback got me another psychiatrist and another psychologist. And this psychiatrist was from Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Safalafi. Gotta shout him out, because he said there's nothing wrong with you other than no one ever talked to you and heard about your life. Like Gary, Indiana and Kalamazoo, that's a cultural difference. He knew about Gary, so he asked me to explain a little bit about my story, which led to him saying, my prescription is that you talk to a therapist, not take medication. It's because of his background in Brooklyn, New York, and he worked at the Kalamazoo Community Mental Health, downtown Kalamazoo. But he also let me know that this was his last month and that he was leaving because the culture here didn't even support him as a doctor. So I wanted to lift up my personal experience, but also say he struggled as a doctor because he was non-white, and it was different for even him. So Dr. Ferguson, I had the opportunity of asking you a real question on a call when we were all on the call, like how is this real for the community? And you answered me so for real. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you being here, being the co-creator. Why is this important for Black and brown communities?
So I'm going to answer your question. I promise I'm going to get to it. And some of the stuff Gabby said, though, I'm over here like, oh, yes, yes, yes. So one of the things in therapy that I work primarily with BIPOC folks, I always have throughout my entire career. I find them and I pull them in. And one of the questions I ask often is, first of all, who are you? And we have to dismantle all of that. But the other is, are you messed up, or is this about you navigating a messed up world? And I think, we've got over pathologizing Blackness. We have over pathologizing Black emotion, human emotion. There are certain ways that we have been told to behave, certain ways we've been told to see ourselves. And when we act as ourselves, a lot of times that has been pathologized. We can talk about the angry Black woman. We can talk about the angry Black man. I'm just responding to what you just presented to me. And then it's pathologized and criminalized. And so, some of those things are things that we need to be communicating and talking about. Gabby was talking about in the school system. It's definitely happening with our Black and brown boys. I had a situation when a teacher, my son was experiencing, really, he's an only child and he's just used to being attended to all the time. So he's acting out a little bit to get that attention. And she wanted to put him in a program with students who have behavioral problems. And if I didn't have that understanding and that knowledge, and he's in an all-white school system, and we had to have a good talk, and we had a real good talk. But I knew that, I understood that. I want all of us parents to understand that so we can help our children in this educational system. We know education is one of the most racist systems we have in this country, and it changes the lives of our kids. And so part of it too is about knowledge and education. What are we looking at? What are we looking for? How do we then critique some of the diagnosis and prognosis that we've been given? You talked about somebody meeting with you for a few minutes and prescribing you medication. I'm not anti-medication, not at all. And that is a prescription that you write after getting to know a person. You have to understand their whole ecosystem. There's problems with the ecosystem that's acting on a person, and what you see that you pathologize is reaction. And so you have to really, really be careful with diagnosing folks and pathologizing a lot of the things that really are just not what the system says is the norm, right? And so we need to start challenging that, or continuing to challenge that. Access is important. That's why we're here. That's why the collective, and Gabby talked about that. But so is when you sit in therapy. Therapy is about trust. You have to have trust. You have to have a relationship. It's okay that you don't trust mental health. It's okay that you don't trust the medical system. You have no reason to trust folks in the medical system. Our history is not a history that the medical system, mental health system has proven to us to be trustworthy. And there is some help still that you are entitled to. I see it as you're entitled to receiving the care to help you thrive and be your best self. And so this collective is about ensuring that there is access, but that there are also people where we can start to break down those barriers and trust, so that people can get the care that they are entitled to. It's a right. To me, mental health care feels like a right. And so the world has not said that. White supremacy has not said that that's our right. And it is. And so that's what this collective is about. It's about building that bridge, making those connections, about dismantling a racist system that has kept us from getting the care that we need.
Thank you very much. And before going over to Mr. Robert Washington, I want to touch on, again, just being on the receiving end of getting called certain things or told certain things or just discarded, period. I want to lift up that for me in the Black community growing up in Gary, Indiana, church was, and not anything against church whatsoever. My grandmother died a devout Christian. I love her to life. But I learned maybe 7th, 8th grade that the church wasn't the answer for everything that I was experiencing as a young man that was seeing violence. I had been shot at multiple times by junior high and raised by, again, primarily Black women. My father was killed when I was young, or 2 years old, actually. And that was trauma, which I didn't even know what trauma was until being an adult. Because again, in my community, personally, for me, you have church in one section, and then in another section, you have what I was told when I went to jail at 17 for being assaulted by police officers and charged with resisting and obstructing an officer. That's how I got my first felony. Not only was I told by my family that this was my fault, me and my cousin, like, you know that they kill Black people, you know, you don't yank away from the police, you listen whatever they have to say. And we were scolded by our family and were made to feel like it was our fault. Going to an alternative school, again, it was my fault. And then after church, you have the other part that is you're hard-headed, you're off. Black teachers told me don't act my color growing up. There was so many different things just within the Black community that I learned to not rock the boat, so to speak, even though I am a habitual boat rocker. I just am. And so I was always the one that was being labeled quote unquote crazy, or it just always saying something. And lastly, I want to say at 17, an older Black gentleman told me, if you cry, what the baby's gonna do. And so this reinforced that I'm not supposed to cry, even if it hurts. You know, as a Black man, you cannot afford to be weak, and it's weak to show emotions. And it's like, wow, okay, to accept that is to not only walk into the door of toxic masculinity, like full throttle, like, hey, I'm here, but you're also, I did such a disservice to myself and to my own emotions. So I just wanted to lift that up, Mr. Washington, and going over to you and just saying, Why is this important in the Black and brown communities to have this discussion?
So it's very important for several aspects. You know, one is so that families, African American families, can feel comfortable even beginning to seek out help. You know, when I worked there, like I say, 18 years as an intensive home-based therapist, I loved it because it gave me an opportunity to fight for the underdogs. And when I say underdogs, is that those are people whose voice is not being heard. You know, when we will go into the school systems, I totally respect the school systems because they're part of our stakeholders. So I work directly with them. So this is no knock on them, but also too, they also have their own bias at times where, you know, we might have an IEP meeting, you know, or a behavior plan meeting, and they would already have the chairs set up and already have paperwork right there for the parents. So as these parents walk in the rooms, they're already like, okay, here's the plan, here's the paper. And, you know, they have all the professionals on one side of it. What is a mom going to do when they're saying, well, this is what we feel is best for your kids. You know, we want to put your kids on this IEP program, this behavior or this reduced school program, you know. So the parents like, okay, you know what, who wouldn't be intimidated walking into a room where everything is already prepared and set up for you? You know, it's kind of like the criminal justice system. So, you know, for me, it felt good to be able to help advocate and also to be able to support them through that transition and say, no, we're not signing anything yet. Have you guys diagnosed them? Have they, you know, what are some of the behaviors that you're displaying? Do you have any data, any report that can show us 30 to 60 days of consecutive, you know, behavior problems? You know, so I was able to support the parents and able also to give them a voice of reasoning because they didn't have a voice. They didn't allow them to speak their voice. Even if the parents disagreed, they still kind of force-fed the information and the paperwork, you know, upon them without saying, okay, you know what, read this over. If you don't feel comfortable, talk to someone. So I'm not saying that the school system as a whole, because I really support them. Like I said, I've been working with them for 20 years. But these are some things that I observed as an intensive home-based therapist, but being able to share my expertise and to say, okay, you know what, let's look at a different plan. We don't have to be extreme. Let's start off with something simple and let's work our way up instead of more being extreme and then working our way down. You know, and for me, when I'm working with families, I love doing psychoeducation because a lot of times you got to also to identify, is this environmental or is this mental health? Because we also know, let's, you know, keep it real. There's some crazy stuff that can go on inside of a family home that can drive anybody to go to school and act out if they witness whatever behaviors they seen in the home. So if that carries over to where this kid maybe didn't get any sleep last night, it could have been a lot of disruption in the home the night before. It's going to carry over when he go get on that school bus, or he might feel agitated, irritable. There's so many different emotions that kids experience due to stressful, toxic home environments that can carry over into the schools. And when kids are not ready to learn within that box that the Kalamazoo Public Schools put them in, then it's easy to say, you know what, you're being defiant, you're refusing to follow directions, you know, you're not cooperative, go down to the office. What kid is not going to act out when he doesn't have a platform or an opportunity to express his feelings and emotions? You know, so for my job was always working with my boys because like I said, I specialize, I love boys, nothing against the females, but it was just a little bit more challenging, you know, dealing with the female population. So I'd rather put all my eggs and work with the boys that I can identify and they can identify with me. We had a common bond where we can easily relate to each other. But for me, it was just more or less teaching them some healthy skill sets, some social skills, coping skills, you know, how to do a lot of breathing techniques in that moment when their buttons are being pushed, you know, or also a lot of opportunities, how to express yourself. You know, if you're feeling overwhelmed in school, instead of acting out, just say, hey, you know what, can I take a break? So for me, it's really needed because we don't want therapy to always seem like it's a taboo, like there's something crazy. But we also, too, we want to protect the parents because if parents even put their kids in therapy, are they going to be labeled as bad parents? Once we reveal and peel back that onion, also, too, to crucify them and label them to say they did something wrong. And a lot of in the Black community, we associate everybody with CPS. That was always amazing. I would come into the homes and they were like, you work for CPS. Even I get this today. And I'm like, no, we're not affiliated. So it's good to have this conversation just to show that we're a separate entity to where we're here to help and protect you. And I go over confidentiality all the time with my parents and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to work directly with you. by law and by the state code, here's only ways I can break confidentiality. But I'm here not to reveal and judge you as a parent, but also teach you some skill sets. So I think it's very important that we make parents feel safe in this environment, that they can come to us and not be crucified to where we're judging them as either good or bad parents, just to say, hey, you know what, my kid is struggling, I want to bring some help. But then we also want to identify them as, what did you do wrong as a parent?
Whoa, thank you very much for that. Okay, so the next part of the agenda asks what barriers, but we all have been lifting up barriers. And what you just shared, Mr. Robert Washington, sparked something. So we're going to go backwards. Here's a barrier. Here's a few barriers that I've witnessed. So one of them I wanted to lift up is, you talked about the home life being, it could be toxic. And I wanted to just chime in to say also schools. So I went to Gary, Indiana public schools, and you can be hit. It starts out with you holding your hand out and getting hit with the ruler for disciplinary problems. And then that turned into getting hit with the wooden board all through until you graduated. And I was hit often because it could be anything: laughing out loud, passing a note, getting up to sharpen your pencil too many times, dropping your pencil too many times. You could just be hit in front of the whole class. So you had humiliation and violence. You're being taught violence. Gary also had what some consider a gang problem. And again, violence. By the time I was in high school, 16 years old, I was expelled from public schools for taking a gun to school. Nobody asked me why I had the gun. No one. And this is something that I talk to young men about now, because I've met multiple people that have taken guns to school. And whenever I hit them with the real question of, were you afraid? Did you feel afraid? It's always yes. And I didn't feel like nobody understood what I was going through. So who could protect me if you won't even hear me? And so you have teachers that hit you, and then you can go home and say, Mama, the teacher hit me and I don't think I deserve to be hit. And then sometimes within my community, it was because hitting students was accepted. It was no different than somebody saying, Mama, Miss Jones just doesn't like me. A parent has to weigh the two. And sometimes you can get dismissed as, it's not about you. It's not about this. But when you were hit, like, this stuck with me. Like, I got hit multiple times for things that I didn't do. And I remember saying to myself, this is on me. So nobody who I went to school with, if the teacher can hit me, my classmate could not. This made me extra violent toward anybody who I went to school. Mama can hit me. Aunties can hit me. Adult teachers can hit me. Even our security guards in Gary could hit you. The lunch matrons, the janitors, everybody had, any adult within the school system had the right to paddle you. Gym teachers, whoever. And they would often go get the men. If you got in trouble in a women's class, they would go get the men to hit you. So you know it hurt. These things made me say, nobody my age could hit me, period. Like, I get hit enough, nobody my age can hit me. This turns victim into the villain. Now, going past that, I want to just fast forward. Here in Kalamazoo County, barriers. There's a young man here from Detroit. When I met his mother, she was 5 kids pregnant with her 6th and living in the Mission. We were just passing out candy. I met her just randomly. We talked. I met the kids. I thought they were awesome. I introduced her to everybody I knew. We stay in contact to this day. That was 5 years ago now. Her son was going to a school here in Kalamazoo County and wasn't keeping up at first due to the transition and him being in the mission. I found out in Kalamazoo County that the same way in Michigan, you could be fired and nobody has to explain. Children can be sent to alternative schools and they don't need an explanation. And it took advocacy from myself and a few others to make sure that he was able to stay in school. So now here we go with the barriers. I'm leaving this with y'all. In the state of Michigan, the age of reason is 7 years old, meaning at 7, they think kids have the cognitive decision-making skills to not only differentiate right from wrong, but can also be placed in bracelets in the back of a squad car and taken to a detainment center. And we don't have youth police. The same adult police that will come get me will come get that 8-year-old for stealing a candy bar. In Kalamazoo County, the biggest homeless population amongst elementary school kids in the whole state of Michigan is Kalamazoo County. In Kalamazoo County, the biggest homeless population is single Black mothers. And in Kalamazoo County, we have a mandate that shares we have a mandate that's been in effect since 2000 that mandates the sharing of students' information with jails, courts, and prosecutors. So with that, and then y'all heard, I was not a bad child, I don't believe, but school to prison pipeline is real. Rather than asking about some of the barriers, and you're free to lift up as many more as you would like, but I wanted to name those things because when I found these out, and the last one is 49007, 2 miles in any direction from 49007, which is where I live, there's a 14-year life expectancy difference. With all of these things on the table and no access or not even the knowledge or familiarity of therapy, these are not just barriers, these are pitfalls, traps, and some other things like it. Yeah, so that's my take on that. I'm sorry for talking so long on that, but these are the things that showed up for me. As soon as we found out about mental health, I was like, wow, nobody ever talked to me about this, ever. Dr. Ferguson, I have to start it off with you because of some of the real conversations we've had behind the scenes on the Truth Talks call. I just so appreciate you taking the time to even help co-create, but to want to build up community in this type of way. And so with that, I'm shutting up and turning it over to you.
So thanks for sharing that experience. I think I want to be clear about just a couple things because I like that this platform, I can be clear about it. Violence and mental health, the media has created this narrative, and I do it too sometimes. Well, let me just say this, because I am a psychologist, I'm always asking questions like how much of this, because you're talking about behavior, what we see is behavior. So why has someone acted this way? Now, the conclusion that they got mental health issues because they shot up somebody, right? That's where we have a little bit of a problem, because then when people with mental health conditions seek help or they're acting in certain ways, they're considered violent. And let's be clear, majority of the people with mental health conditions are not violent. So the criminalizing of mental health is a big, 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 big barrier. And the punishment of mental health is a big, big, big barrier. So there are times that people don't go and seek help because they've broken up a car. And, you got some behaviors that they are problematic. You can't be doing that. You can't act that way and it not have natural consequences. So let's be clear, there is violence in the world, but no one is asking why. It's that curiosity. And so we have to have that opportunity to be with folks that will ask why. And if there's punishment, there may be punishment, but that punishment should be delayed before we're understanding the whys. If punishment is coming, we still have to understand the whys, because that's how you recover. That's how you restore. You have to understand yourself. There are times that I act certain ways and I need to know why. Why have I gotten to this point of anxiousness that I can't talk? How is it that this thing is happening in me and I can't control throwing this bottle? What is that? Like, don't I need to know that and understand that? Because actually, there are some things that I can examine within myself to work through that buildup so that I can behave a way that really honors who I am, honors my values, shows that I respect myself as a person, shows that I respect my property, shows that I respect my mama and my community. So a lot of things we don't ask children is we punish them and say, go over there or do that, or we whoop them or whatever. But has anybody said, why did you do that? And wait for the response. I don't know. No, let's talk about why did you do that? Yeah, you're punished, but like, let's talk about why. What was happening in your heart? What did your body feel? What were you thinking when you did that? Like, that's the stuff we need to get into. So what's a barrier is we're not approaching Black and brown people with curiosity. We're approaching them looking to control this behavior that we see because it's been violent in some kind of way, or it's disrupted something. So part of it is, even as psychologists and clinicians, we got to start asking questions and waiting for the responses before we project on or label. So I think that's a big barrier, even when we have Black and brown people in mental health systems or in the criminal justice system. I worked in the criminal justice system for many, many, many years, and people were still deserving of my why. And it's and if you riled up today, that's okay. I'll be back tomorrow to ask you why. And it's not just for my paperwork, it's for your self-understanding. People are experts at themselves. We have to spend time with them to equip them with the tools necessary to understand themselves so that they can be in the world their best. And I think that's really, really important for us to really start thinking about. So definitely detaching criminal violence from mental health. We can achieve wellness. And sometimes we do behave in ways that are problematic, but we got to understand a little bit more why that is. And I just want to say also, one of the questions that you asked, or one of the prompts was around gun violence, because we're talking a lot about mental health and gun violence. One of the biggest ways, probably the only way, honestly, that mental health is connected with gun violence that is well researched is around suicide. So guns and mental health is connected through the risk of suicide. That's the only way that we've been able to really look at through research links to gun violence and mental health. But there are other dynamic environmental, societal factors that are really contributing to gun violence. And least of those is mental health. But around suicide, 50% of the fatalities to guns is through suicide. So I want us to start thinking about that also, not just looking at mental health as the reason for gun violence, but like looking at mental health as one of the least factors in all of the other societal problems that are going on that are contributors to gun violence. So I wanted to bring that in the conversation too, because I know you wanted to make sure we address that, because that is some of the contemporary conversations that we are having. And one of the reasons the collectives was formed is because we understand that people in our community were being victimized through gun violence. Now, the impact of gun violence is racial trauma, like the things that we've been having conversation around within our community. And I can talk more, but it'll take too long to connect all those parts. But that was a part of our initial conversations around the trauma associated with our Black and brown people being killed in our communities due to gun violence and the impact on our community. And we were talking about that in the context of racial trauma and needing to make sure this collective was there so that people could have that support.
Thank you for that. I gotta leave you on the hot seat for a minute, Dr. Ferguson, because I gotta ask you something. So there's a movie called Boys in the Hood, and it stars a lot of people, including Ice Cube, and he plays a character, Doughboy. And at the end of the movie, he says to his friend, Cuba Gooding Jr., who plays Trey in the movie, either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. When you say underdiagnosis, and then you just touched on some of the things that you did, it just hit me so personally that nobody would ask questions. Is that undervaluing who we are? Is that intentional? Or is that, it seems intentional, honestly, to say, when a teacher, or like Mr. Robert Washington lifted up, when you walk into a room and it's already set up and you have already been, unfortunately, underdiagnosed, and you're just kind of put in this box, and we're not seen as people, and our stories are not important, I definitely see the limb of racism coming off this tree. But like, is that simply what it is?
I'm trying to condense this because I could talk about this all day long. So what you're asking me is it intentional that the question why is not being asked? I think you're absolutely correct. It's really back to the question around mattering and deservingness, right? And let me just be clear. My therapist, when I went to therapy, both of them were white, phenomenal. They asked me why. They asked me about my mom. They asked me about my dad. They asked me about my community. So I think there are ways, right, for white folks to still be able to connect with us and get to our whys and ask those questions. So again, we're at this place where mental health in and of itself, some of our theories, we didn't matter when our theories were created. Our conditions, our emotions, like none of that was researched. Like we're not those people. So the intentional part is historical. And unless we in our training start to interrogate even the theories that really form how we do therapy, then we will continue to perpetuate that. So many of the people, even today, who are engaging with people around mental health, they ain't interrogated none of that to understand the intentionality around it. So, and I'm gonna bring women into it also, right? Because, we are still being treated as neurotic. And so a lot of these theories that really formulated how we work with people, absolutely, it was intentional. We were never supposed to be in those spaces where our lived experiences were considered. And then now our lived experiences are considered, and we have to think about how, though, in what way to still put us behind bars and put us in cages, or really diagnose us out of a healthy lived experience, right? And so I say intentional, and there is an unawareness even within the mental health system around how we're continuing to perpetuate it.
Thank you very much for that, because you were just, when you were talking, I was like, wow, is this? Oh, so okay, they didn't want to hear me, or anybody like me. Thank you for that.
Can I just say one more thing too, around this too, as a mental health professional? When we don't understand something, it's hard. It's hard to be in therapy with people we don't understand, right? And I think that's one thing about Black and brown folks, right? Is that, like, we'll start with love. We'll start with you matter. And then we'll go read, we'll go try to understand, we'll ask you, we'll talk to you in order to try to understand. I think the way white supremacy has worked is that, and I see it sometimes with my colleagues, when they have a Black or brown client that they don't understand and they are struggling. And I would say things like, just ask them why, and just stay there in 2, 3, 4 sessions, right? It's this idea that I should know. I should be an expert. I should be able to come up with a label or come up with a diagnosis, right? And so it's really challenging as a therapist to be with a client that you don't get or you don't understand. And what we're saying is we don't understand always either, but we're willing to lean into that unknown place and sit with a person. So you are not a label, you are not a diagnosis, you are a person. So we will meet you at that place or in that place. And then if there is a diagnosis that have to happen, I know you as a person enough that when I make that decision to attach that label to your experience, then it's well known, it's well researched, it's well understood because I've spent that time with you. So I think a lot of white clinicians have a hard time when they don't know. And that's a personal struggle, and it challenges their sense of self or their sense of expertise a lot of times, but it's okay not to know. And you just start with love and forming a human connection. And I think that is kind of the way to enter into that space and to be in that space with another human being.
Thank you for that. That additional information with that was important. That also makes me lift up the accountability part, because Mr. Robert Washington lifted up something about CPS, and I wanted to touch on the accountability from the learned. So I was taught you keep your business in the house, period. You especially don't tell white people any of your business, but you don't go to school and even tell the teachers, principal, you don't tell anybody what's going on. And that was even when our lights or water was out. Like, that's personal. You keep that between, that's us, period. This has played out in bad parts to where when I first moved to Kalamazoo, I was born and raised in Gary, so I had a whole life already. There's an older cousin who I thought was an older cousin who told me she's really my aunt, and that my grandfather had these extramarital kids by my grandmother's sisters, multiple sisters. And so I have an uncle and a couple aunts, and this was like a family secret. And I can kind of smile and say that because it didn't hurt and harm me directly. And it's like, well, yeah, everybody has family secrets, but I've also heard some things within my own family and other families that people say, oh, we just don't talk about that. This is a barrier that hurts. And then when a person finally gets to the point to feel like they can talk using I statements, speaking for myself, I remember being reminded of why I can say so much. And just lift up what Mr. Robert Washington said about the CPS. In Gary, I don't know anybody in my life that grew up in a foster home. And I've had some talks to where I said I don't know if that's good, because sometimes people were forced to stay in that traumatic situation and just figure it out. But then the alternative I've seen in Kalamazoo, they'll take your kids quick, like for the most simple things. And that is not cool either. So I just wanted to lift up that when we have the secrets, and we don't want to talk because we don't trust systems, we don't trust that white people have our best interests at hand, that can also harm us and hurt. But then also you have systems that set in place. If you are bold enough to say something, then like Mr. Robert Washington said, you could be reprimanded or have somebody come in and say, well, maybe you need some help, and the help includes let us take the kids for a little while, and you have to prove that you're stable or able to get them back. Mr. Robert Washington, I want to pass that over to you on that part as being another barrier of those two parts. Like, we keep secrets for a reason, I think. Traditionally, we were taught to be quiet because systems could separate your family or divide, but it has harmed us, I've seen as well.
Correct. I mean, like say growing up in Chicago, that was a family value. It was like, what goes on in this house stays in this house, and I even work with kids now where it's interesting where I'm doing a Zoom and I might ask a kid like, hey, how was your weekend? And they'll look at their mom like, okay, is it okay? Should I say anything? And I'm like, okay, well, and I asked mom, hey, but did everything go okay? Because I don't want to put him in an uncomfortable position to reveal some family secrets that mom is like, you know, hey, this is what's going on. You know, so it is very important. And when we do send our kids out, what information, even if it's not accurate, even if a kid, it wasn't something that was done directly, but it could have been something that happened indirectly, where relative could have came over, and it could have been something as far as there was some domestic violence or some violence or whatever. Then now mom is saying, hey, you know what? You guys shouldn't have said anything, because now it can be misconstrued, because sometimes kids don't always tell the full story. But when you just get a snippet of it, and then you take this information and say, well, this kid told me this and blah, 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 without even going to the parents. So for me, I've always, when I work with families, the first 30 days is engagement, it's trust. I'm not there to ask a bunch of questions. I'm not there to pry and say, you know, like I say, when I did intensive home-based therapy, I loved it. But when I would see different family members at the home, that wasn't my business. I'm not here to police. I'm here to work with my identified consumer. So I want to make the family to know that, hey, you know what? I'm here to build trust. I want you to trust me. Let's build a rapport. Let's work on engagement. I'm not here to ask you a whole bunch of random questions, because we already paranoid. So when you dive in as a therapist or even as a professional or whoever, and you going inside someone's home, this is their safe haven. You cannot go in asking a ton of questions, because that red flag is going to go off. And like, I remember, because I would have kids say, you know, the police came over to our house and they just arrested so-and-so, not knowing the full scoop of it, but it was just too much information that got revealed to where they've been traumatized by seeing things that didn't work out in their favor, and over talking to where the parents would come home and say, why was you talking? I told you don't say anything. Because once again, kids are not revealing the full truth, even though, you know, we also know whereas there's smoke, there is fire, but it's just the fact that it can be misconstrued. And now the whole family has been exposed to saying now it's so hard to, like you said, we're dealing with our kids being separated. So that is a huge barrier for our community to know that, hey, you know what, there are people that you can trust, but then also too, how do we reestablish that trust? What does trust look like? You know, so I think it's that whole psychoeducation that we're talking at them, but we're not talking to them. And that's where I take the time to engage my families, engage people of the community by always doing some psychoeducation. And I'm glad that I am a face in the community and a resource, because people will call me first and say, hey, this is something that happened. What do you think I should do? And I'm glad that I can be that resource to say, hey, you know what, let's talk in person, because I need to know the full story in order to be able to give you the right information and the right advice. So, you know, it's very important that we also, like I say, sit down and educate and make our families feel safe on what they can, and also helping them talk to the kids, especially like my boys. I always tell parents is that we don't want to suppress their feelings and emotions, because when they do need to talk, they don't know how to talk, because we'll just say, you know what, tell me how you feel. Then they'll say, well, okay, you know what, they shut that voice down. So for me, I'm always doing like a feelings chart with my boys, because I want them to be able to know you're not always angry. You're not always mad. There are so many other different feelings that you're going through, but you need to be able to express yourself when someone says, how are you doing? Or what's on your mind? Or, you know, you seem upset. Don't let them control your narrative and put words in your mouth. You can express yourself. So that is a skill set that I work with all my boys, is going through where they can't say, I don't know. You know, that's a major no for me. It's like, no, look at this chart. Tell me, how are you feeling right now in this moment? Because a lot of times they really don't know. They do know, but they don't know. But they vocabulary, their toolbox haven't been expanded to be able to express, to say, hey, you know what, I'm frustrated. I'm overwhelmed. You know, I'm agitated in this moment. So for me, it's extending that vocabulary so that they can express themselves, so they can be accurate in understanding their feelings and emotions, and also to their thoughts. So I think the best thing for us to do is open up that awareness to be able to talk to our people of color, but then also too, for the professionals who are available, doing a lot more psychoeducation and helping them with awareness of what's going on and how they can seek these helps and how they can maneuver through times to say, hey, you know what, because they can't suppress and keep all this information in. You do have to trust someone. What does trust look like? You know, how do you move? Because if you have to bottle all that information that's going on inside, that's not healthy also. So we don't want to give them the wrong message of saying, well, don't trust no one. You got to be able to decipher who you can trust and how much information are you willing to divulge into whoever you're going to have access to, or allow them to have access to you?
Thank you for that, for breaking that down. And that's I say this a lot of times when we have a lot of community discussions, and I know we have to have a part 2 with this so we can dive in a little deeper. We have a community question that actually comes from Francis with Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. And I want to segue into a part as well. So this will be double. So DMX's overdose really messed me up. Can we talk about the spike in ODs in our communities that has increased due to COVID, and how we can support folks with addiction? The segue part, or the compound part that I want to add to that, is going back to, again, some of that shame. Some of it is shame, but if you have parents that's struggling with substance abuse, not only are we told to not go to school and talk about these things or talk about what's going on in the house, but this is like almost, I won't say almost, again, using I statements. I grew up very similar to this. It feels like suppressing abuse, like you know something is wrong, but you can't say it, or you're not supposed to say it because you don't want to get somebody in trouble, even though it feels totally wrong. That is a barrier. And I just wanted to lift up the substance abuse. So that first part, and then that other part of whether it's somebody self-medicating because they feel a certain type of way, or covering for somebody who's self-medicating because, well, I love them and I don't want to disrupt their lives. And Dr. Ferguson, I do see the benefits, and we will get right to that. And you can actually start with—
You want me to go with that? Okay. So one of the things that I teach a class, theories of substance abuse class. And one of the fundamental things that we have to really start challenging for ourselves is when we ask ourselves, like, we're in therapy, we're asking people, a lot of the content of what you're talking about is why you use, and you move to like how to challenge those behaviors and so on and so forth. But we have a lot of theories around and ways of understanding why people use substances. And you just mentioned, I don't know if it's self-medicating. I don't know if it's this. I don't know if it's that. One of the things that's going to help us all really start to see the humanity in that experience is to think about what substances do to your brain. You ever try to quit anything? It's hard. The way substances impact the brain really manifests in people's inability to quit, right? It's not about your character. Why you use, that's one thing. Why you continue to use is an entirely different thing. Intervention is needed. So I come from a family with substance abuse, and I can't tell you how many times everybody in my family tried to quit. And I can remember thinking, like, why you just won't stop? Like, come on, don't you see the impact that this is having on us? Can't you see this? Can't you see that? None of that helps. None of that works. The praying don't work, right? I think prayer works, right? But the prayer is not working because we haven't considered what's in the brain, how those substances have impacted the brain, how someone could use so many drugs to the point of killing themselves, right? We like to blame people for that. We like to say they knew better, or why didn't they? They had it all. People who have it all still kill themselves due to substances, right? It's because of what's happening in the brain. Intervention is needed for that. Help is needed for that. We've seen our people die, and when there's not access to treatment, I used to work in the ER, and people would come in after overdose. Where are they going when they leave? Like, what do we give them in that 48 hours to ensure that they could be okay? Because they got withdrawal symptoms. So the brain is telling them you have to go back. And then that's the most dangerous time, when they are withdrawing and there's that absence of, and then when they use again, they're going to overuse, because that's how the brain works around substances. So we're not thinking about those pieces. So when you're talking about, you know, thinking about what folks need in order to stop using. It's the resources. We have to improve and increase those resources. We have to really talk with them about the types of intervention that they need. You do need to pray because your spiritual self needs to be a part of your recovery. You do. And you need these other things. If you take something away, you got to replace it with something. There are things that give you a little bit of dopamine and serotonin rush in your brain that aren't substances, but they don't feel as good as substances, right? So you got to rewire your brain to enjoy painting again. You got to rewire your brain to really enjoy exercising. And those become some of the replacements, but that's going to take time. So what we first have to do is stop demonizing those people who are struggling with addiction. And yeah, addiction have a lot of consequences. Your relationships, people who are addicted to substances, they lose so much. They lose their family, they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, they lose their sense of self, right? And so you take those drugs away, they got to deal with all of those losses. And I don't know about you, if I've destroyed things through my use of substances, when I'm not on those substances, I have to face that. And I don't want to face that. I don't want to face the purse I stole. I don't want to face, you know, that person I harmed or my family member who I fought because I couldn't control myself. So like, let's really think about the humanity in all of this and the impact of substances on the brain and how that takes away people's control, and start really thinking about approaching people who are struggling with that use in a very, very human way. And with the isolation and not having resources, not being able to connect with people, not having those buffers, a lot of people who have history with substances, it's been exacerbated during COVID. Like, it's been exacerbated, that isolation there. What are the alternatives, right? You're at home. And so in COVID, we've lost so much in COVID. So those are more losses piled on top. So some of us are using during COVID to cope, but some of us are addicted and can't be without those substances, right? Like, so there's a lot of reasons that people get to the point of overdose. But the one we don't talk about as much is the brain. So I'm talking about needing professional help, needing intervention, and making sure those resources are in the community, and as long as they need them. A 30-day program is not enough. A 6-month program is not enough. Like, let's be honest and real. You have to rebuild your life. You're rewiring your brain. You have to rebuild your life. So that's a long haul support that we have to be willing to give to people in recovery. Some people benefit from that, like support system. That's Narcotics Anonymous, AA, definitely the church, building up the community to be a place that's welcoming, a place where people can check in and say, hey, I want to use today. And somebody say, go pray about it. No, I am having urges physically right now. Can we meditate? Can we breathe together? Can you just sit here? Let's play cards. Let's play dominoes, right? Until those urges pass. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, that we're not really helping people put those systems in place so that they can maintain their recovery. And that's what needs to happen.
Thank you. That was important. Mr. Washington, the same, before jumping into the benefits, the same on the substance abuse.
And first things first, I think we need to identify that it's that whole thing in research that they always say with substance abuse, is that there also too that mental illness component. So it's the thing of, they say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You have to treat them both, because a lot of times you just focus on the substance abuse. Well, why are you getting high? Why are you doing this and that? If you don't address those underlying issues, which is mental health, then you're pretty much wasting your time. So think about back in the day where we have people go to like Gateway, then you have people doing mental health treatment. Why you have 2 therapists work? That's why I say, for me, certified, and Dr. Ferguson, knowing the SPADA certification, that's why we call it co-occurring disorders. You address them, you treat them at the same time, because you're self-medicating because you are compensating for a mental disorder. But a lot of times we just want to just focus on saying, little Johnny just want to smoke a bunch of weed, or they just want to drink this and that. Okay, well, they're not just smoking for a reason. So in that instance, that's where also too comes back again, that psychoeducation, that we don't want to misdiagnose, we want to overdiagnose. We don't want to overtreat, we don't want to undertreat. But the more awareness that we do have to where we can go in and say, okay, what's the best care? So, that's where that co-occurring is very important, on not just focusing, spending your time saying, okay, well, we got so-and-so, off smoking weed, or we got so-and-so off drinking. Okay, but you didn't address that mental illness. They're going to relapse again. And we're wondering why, because they're dealing with whatever that Axis 1 diagnosis may be. So I want to just put that out there and say it's very important that we identify that usually 9 times out of 10, and not always, if someone is self-medicating and they're indulging heavily in substance abuse, there's some underlying mental health issues there. So that is something that's very important that I don't think we talk about enough, or there's, like I said, there's a lack of knowledge and just information about co-occurring disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. And that's perfect to dive into the benefits, because Dr. Ferguson already lifted up meditating, somebody taking the time to actually saying, I'll sit with you into those urges, fade, so to speak. I want to start with Gabby with saying how somebody can contact the Black and Brown Collective, and then going into the benefits. And I want you all to chime in on what are the benefits of therapy and what can be the benefits of therapy. And thank you, Dr. Ferguson, for posing that question, because I think that's important.
Thanks. I'll read out the phone number that people can call, and then maybe you can list it officially as part of the program. The number to reach me for these services is 269-348-6120. And then if you go to the Rooted website, which is rootead.org, there will be a little tab for the Black and Brown Therapy Collective there, and it has all of the information there. My email is bb_therapy@rooted, spelled with the EA again, .org. So those are the main ways to reach me. I usually get back to people within 24 hours. And before I talk about the benefits, I just wanted to backtrack a tiny bit, because Dr. Ferguson and Mr. Washington reminded me of this. I grew up in the undocumented community, and I think it's important to lift up that what Dr. Ferguson mentioned is, one of the fixes to this issue would be to have more resources available to all people, because it is a right. And really to think of people as humans. And I think that one thing that I think about a lot, and I think other people could use this conversation or this thought in their brain to think about or consider, is who is considered a human and who isn't considered a human, who's considered a person, who's not a person, who's invisible because they have to be invisible to survive. Those sorts of things. And I've been thinking about those things my whole life, just because I grew up in the undocumented community, so everyone around me had to be invisible for survival. I have somebody very close to me who I won't name because, again, they're undocumented, who was addicted to meth. And oftentimes these resources, even if they were available, they wouldn't be available to him because he has to be invisible. He can't access them. And one thing I want to lift up about the Black and Brown Therapy Collective that I've been pretty outspoken about since the very beginning since I joined, is that we make sure this resource is available to people without documents, because they're often shut out of a lot of other programs. Like, you can't get Medicaid. You can only get emergency Medicaid, or if you're pregnant in the United States, then you can get it temporarily because you're carrying a citizen of the United States, which is totally wild to consider. It's very alien, I think. And so I just wanted to point that out, and also highlight that because undocumented people, who, by the way, are in our community, who are every color, there are a lot of Black undocumented people, white undocumented people, brown undocumented people, because they can't access a lot of these resources a lot of the time. I think a lot of the responsibility for these needed interventions will fall on the community. And I mean, it's great that we can be there for each other, but a lot of people, don't have a lot of the, sometimes people will just fall short of the qualifications that they need to really be able to help somebody. Like if this person is like really needing something, or like they're like feeling like they're gonna do something drastic, someone in the community might not know how to deal with that, and it would be really helpful to have a professional help. So I think the benefits are pretty, like, you know, we've listed them. Yeah, you can do a lot on your own, and oftentimes you have to do it for survival. But the professional help is going to be like, I think it's going to be more efficient, I guess I would say. And I'll just pass it on to everyone else since we're running out of time.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And Emily did put the number of how to contact you, as well as the, the website. So that's there. Dr. Ferguson, what are some of the benefits of therapy?
So I'll just add a couple more. So for me, I'm always trying to help folks get to self-understanding, to be able to make those links and connections within you. That's what the talking is for. The talking is for a reason. Therapy used to be called the talking cure. So first and foremost, talking things out is a release. And so we need to release a lot of the things that we're carrying around. Some of the burdens we're carrying, when we internalize those and never release those, then that turns into symptomology, heart issues, like back issues, headaches, and so on and so forth. So first of all, to get those things out, to release those things so you're not carrying them around. In a safe and trusting therapeutic relationship, you are in partnership. And so you have a sounding board. So I release those things, and those things are spoken back to me, and I hear them. Does that still fit for how I see myself and understand myself? Sure. So I'm holding that as a way to understand and have good insight around who I am and why I do the things that I do. If it doesn't fit, you get to talk about that. And when you take that back in, that's something that can help you thrive and can benefit you and can help you grow. I did not mention a diagnosis yet, did I? So this is about self-understanding first and foremost. Many of us have goals. Many of us have things that we want to work on, ways that we want to grow. Therapy will help you do that. You have a partner. I have some knowledge. Mr. Washington kept mentioning coping skills, mechanisms. We know some tools that we can try out and you can experiment with. Some will work, some will not. But you have this space where you are held accountable for trying those things out. And when you come back next week, we're going to talk about how that worked and if we need to tweak those. All right, that's amazing. You keep that for the rest of your life. So eventually you come to be able to take care of yourself through some of the things that were modeled for you in the therapeutic relationship. You become your own therapist. I have these conversations in my mind. I'll give you a great example. My therapist helped me understand I moved through the world with emotion. I was moving through the world with emotion. He helped me bring my thoughts into a place that everything didn't hurt my feelings, that everything wasn't perfect. So I have a feeling, I have a reaction, interrogate it, think about it, because you can't keep making decisions from your feelings. It's leading to a lot of pain and behaving in ways you don't want to behave. So like, how can we bring your thoughts? What do you think about that feeling? Or if I'm too heady, because sometimes I get too heady, how to live with my heart and my head is what my therapist helped me do. So that's just as an example, right? I didn't have a diagnosis. I didn't need a diagnosis, but those are some of the things that can happen in therapy. So the benefits of psychoeducation, Mr. Washington talked about, are learning the things that we know in psychology that you can apply to your life and reach your goals and it help you thrive and be well in the world. So I think everybody can benefit from therapy. Nothing has to be wrong with you, because remember, we all have mental health that we can attend to, and taking care of yourself. Therapy is a way that you can engage in self-care practices to learn and grow and to understand yourself better.
Thank you very much for that. I think you touched on something very important too. Two things. One, I have to give you props. You said it a few times, but you are like, you're plugged, but still talk to a therapist, and didn't mind lifting that up. And I think that that's important. That's so much humility. Like, when you lifted up earlier that, you know, doctors struggling to find that label a lot of times. I think what you just lifted up is like, checks ego and says, I'm human at the end of the day as well. And I think that was one of the most powerful benefits that you lifted up. And it segued to right. Yeah, we have to treat our minds the same way we do with intaking soda, candy, and things like that in order to be healthy. So I think one of the benefits would be unlearning some of the things that the world has taught us, honestly, and beginning that healthy journey. Mr. Robert Washington, same question, closing out. And also, if you have a way that people can contact you or Dr. Ferguson outside of just the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, if there's any information that you want to leave, please do so.
Yep.
And Mr. Robert Washington.
So some of the benefits for me is like say exploring your thoughts, your feelings and worries. Sometimes hopefully you with a therapist that there's no judgment. Like I say, I'm big on developing coping strategies for different situations. I mean, I love what we call DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, staying in the moment. I love those skills because for me, like I say, I always reference my adolescent boys, big shout out to them that I love working with, them is that it's always, my analogy is that it's like you got to be a carpenter and you got a tool belt. If your tool belt only got a hammer and a nail, you can get a job done, but you're very limited. But when we can put a ruler in there, a pencil in there, we can put a tape measure in there. The more skills you have, the problem could never be bigger than you. So when you think about, hey, I'm dealing with this, what skill set can I use? Maybe I need to breathe right now. Maybe I need to do some imagery. Maybe I need to just count to 10 and take, I'm always working with my boys on stop, think, and look techniques, because any situation that they're in, I want them to be able to reference a skill set that they can say, okay, what should I be able to do in this moment? So, we don't want to look back. And for my job as a therapist is that if I don't provide it with, and I tell them all the time, you might not utilize them now, but I guarantee you in 10 years, these skills you can be able to take through the rest of your life. So, those are things where we talk about like practicing some self-reflection and awareness. We looking at open to change. I'm always looking to empower them to become a better self of who they are in that moment. So, those are some of the great, I see more benefits than for them, working with the adolescent boys. So you can see I'm passionate about, working with my population.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. This just reminded me when I was young, when G.I. Joe used to go off, they used to have these informational things and they would end with saying, knowing is half the battle. And when I got older, I found out the other half of the battle was applying what you know. And they didn't say that part. And I think they did it intentionally so you can ask, well, what's the other half of the battle? And that is the other half of the battle, applying what you know. Thank you all for dropping knowledge and jewels today. And now it's up to the community to meet you all halfway and start applying some of the things that we've learned about the Black and Brown Therapy Collective, about Mr. Robert Washington and working, is it Color of, what is the name of it, sir?
I'm at Choice for Changes, 218 West Walnut, and the phone number is 269-344-7997.
All right, thank you very much. We got Gabby De La Cruz, who I will be reaching out to personally for just resources and assistance with community issues and things like that, and making sure that I connect anybody that I know, including family, friends, colleagues. So I'll be making sure to do my part. And lastly, but certainly not least, the co-creator, Dr. Ferguson. I just really want to say, if you have anything, not to close anybody else out, if you have any last words, any of you, please feel free.
I just wanted to share that I am a part of the collective, so I can be contacted through Gabby. So if anyone wants to reach out to just have more conversation, I like to have more conversation. I am a therapist and we can have more conversation. So please feel free to reach out to Gabby and she can connect us.
Thank you all very much. And lastly, can I invite you all for a part two discussion? Okay. Look.
Yeah, and if you wait too long, I'm gonna contact you.
Okay. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Even though this was deep, important, it felt light. It didn't feel real heavy. It felt like we really talked about some important things, but in a non-re-traumatizing type of way, if that makes any sense. I feel real good about this. I think the community is going to receive this and be real appreciative. And I just want to thank you all for the time that you took today to educate.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Nice to meet everyone.
You too. Take care.
Peace.